Diamonds are forever. That's the theme for our reflections this week, not as we look at Bond, but as we look at the Bible. And in particular, as we look at the challenging and instructive narrative of 1 Peter chapter 3. Yesterday in our reflections, we were looking at the diamond of a submissive and godly wife. And today in our reflections, we want to look at the diamond of a submissive and godly husband. Let's read the word of God together from 1 Peter chapter 3. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. When I think about a submissive husband, my mind immediately goes to Richard Bouquet, the long-suffering and often exasperated husband of the famous Hyacinth Bouquet, spelt B-U-C-K-E-T, Bucket, from the television series Keeping Up Appearances. A little more decorum, please, Richard, are Hyacinth's words to him as he dutifully follows 2 steps behind her, carrying the cases. Richard Bouquet, a submissive, long-suffering, and often exasperated husband. Well, Richard Bouquet was a submissive husband, albeit in fictional terms, if ever there was one. And as Peter writes his letter, as Peter pens on parchment his letter to the believers who were scattered in Asia Minor, he's writing not for husbands to keep up appearances, but rather to keep up with what the Word of God says. He's writing to husbands not to keep up a facade or to keep up appearances, but rather to keep up and to keep in kilter with what the Word of God says. And the Word of God says, as we read, dwell with them. You see, a godly husband lives physically with his wife. He doesn't merely share a house, but he lives with her. He recognizes the great point of Paul's teaching on marriage in Ephesians chapter 5. What is that teaching? Well, that teaching is that husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. And husbands too are to love their wives as Christ loved the church. And everything I am saying to you today, I have said first of all, and I'm saying to myself as the husband of but one godly wife. Love and submission will always be sacrificial. And the kind of love and submission we're talking about here biblically flushes out the notion that marriage is simply about romantic love. It's far deeper and costlier than that. The late Tim Keller, in his excellent book, The Meaning of Marriage, writes that, quote, "To be fully known and truly loved is what we need more than anything." Listen to this. "It liberates us from pretense and humbles us out of our self-righteousness. Godly husbands dwell with their wives and are submissive and loving to their wives to the point of following Christ's example as Christ loved the church. They do so, as Peter was instructing here, with understanding. A husband understands the important job of understanding his wife. Dwelling with leads to understanding of. A godly and submissive husband will also give honor. He knows how to make his wife feel honored. Though she submits to him, he takes care to ensure that she is never made to feel like an employee or a maid. The word in the ancient Greek language for the wife is a rare word, meaning more literally the feminine one. And it suggests that the woman's feminine nature should prompt the husband to honor her. Back to Tim Keller again, in his book, The Meaning of Marriage, who writes that to have a marriage that sings requires a spirit-created ability to serve, to honor, and to take yourself out of the center. What Peter is writing is radical teaching. Because in the ancient culture of Peter, in those days, a husband had absolute rights over his wife. And the wife had virtually no rights in the marriage. See, in Roman times, if a man caught his wife in the act of adultery, he could kill her literally and physically on the spot. But if a wife caught her husband in the act of adultery, she could do nothing. Zilch, zero. All the duties and obligations in marriage were put on the wife. And Peter's radical teaching here, as he pens his letter on parchment, is that the husband has God-ordained duties and obligations towards his wife. He mentions the weaker vessel, and in this context, weaker speaks of the woman's relative physical weakness in comparison to men. Men aren't necessarily stronger spiritually than women, but they are generally, and I'm generalizing, generally stronger physically. And what Peter, though, is saying is that a godly husband, a submissive husband, recognizes that whatever limitations his wife has physically, he does not expect more from her than is appropriate and kind. There is a respect, there is an understanding, there is an honor to be given by godly and gracious husbands. Heirs together. A godly husband realizes that his spouse is not only his wife, but also his sister in Jesus Christ. And part of their inheritance in the Lord is only realized in their oneness as husband and wife. This reminds husbands that even though they have been given great authority as the head of the home within marriage, their wives are still equal to them in spiritual privilege and eternal importance. They are joint heirs, heirs together. The diamond of a godly and submissive husband.